Listen up, people. That's right. It's time to listen to the sparks of bliss in your life. I'm your host and life coach, Caroline de Posada from Miami, Florida. And this podcast is an invitation to join me in upgrading our mindset, wellness, and relationships so that together we create a life that unlocks our bliss. Join me each week as we explore practical strategies, inspiring stories, and the moments of clarity, or as we like to call them, los momenticos, that make the world a little more magical. Consider this your weekly dose of wisdom in your pocket. Are you ready? Let's do this.
Hey, listeners, welcome to episode number 15 of Blissin' Up. Today, I want to talk to you about traditions and rituals. Traditions and rituals are a great way to create a life that sparks bliss. Now, if you've been keeping up with the episodes, then you may know that our August theme is back to bliss. And the reason for that is because after having a pretty chaotic summer, I was feeling the need to get back on track, back on the path that sparks bliss. Sometimes you're going through a hard time and you are grieving or you're in crisis or you're stuck in a rut and you kind of get off path. And then it requires some reflection and some intention to get back on. Now, if you didn't listen to that episode, I invite you to do so. It was episode number 13, and it was a great episode on just creating a theme for the month and, using that theme as your North Star throughout the month. So that's what I've been doing ever since. Now, what's funny is I intended to share this exact episode last week, episode number 14, but I didn't because life interrupted us, which was actually the theme of July, but that's neither here nor there. Life interrupted me and I had this crazy, chaotic, audio equipment fail situation that interrupted my recording and I was all frazzled. And I learned so much from that experience that rather than sharing this episode, I chose to share with you the story of the debacle and the golden nuggets that I got from it. And what's wild is that so many of you have responded to me that was your favorite episode so far. And I have to tell you that for those of you that reach out to me and tell me when an episode is one of your favorites or what resonated or why it mattered or why you connected to it, it's so valuable to me. It's very meaningful because I spend all this time speaking into this microphone and like releasing out into the wilderness where I have no idea if anybody's going to listen to it or not. And then when I receive messages from you telling me that something connected, it's just incredibly meaningful and motivating. So thank you for that. So I didn't get a chance to share this whole traditions and rituals episode with you. But life is rigged in our favor and actually worked out perfectly. You see, what I didn't share with you in last week's episode was that one of the reasons I was so frantic about recording my episode that day and why it was like I was in such a hurry was because I was traveling that evening, the evening of the Friday that I recorded. I was traveling to the National Speakers Association and I was going to be there until, for the whole week. So it was really crucial that I recorded my episode before I left on that trip. Interestingly, that convention that I went to, the trip that I took, is a perfect segue into traditions and rituals because I think that convention may be the first place that I ever remember experiencing a spark of bliss, even though at the time that I experienced it, bliss was not in my awareness. It wasn't in my vocabulary. I didn't know how to identify it, but I certainly experienced it. So I think it's more appropriate that I'm sharing this with you today. Now, I'm going to tell you real quick about NSA just because, I don't know, I just think it's it's such an illustration of the message that I'm trying to convey. My father started attending this conference in 1992. It's called the National Speakers Association, and it's a convention for speakers who are in the business of speaking. So industry leaders gather, there are speakers that are teaching their tools and their strategies, and people are masterminding together so that they can pursue this business of speaking. And my father found out about the convention and attended in 1992. And while he was roaming the halls, he discovered that they had a youth program. Now, coincidentally, the youth program the following year the convention was going to be held in Orlando the following year, which was perfect for my dad because he had to convince my mom to let me go. My parents were divorced at the time, and my mom was a little overprotective. She wanted to take care of me. And since the convention was in Orlando, it was very easy for her to join us. So my very first convention, my mom came, which was a beautiful memory because it's the only trip that I remember to date that I went to with both of my parents because my parents were divorced. So that was like the beginning, the beginning of our experiences. So we drove up to Orlando and we went to this convention, and I was very nervous. I didn't know what to expect. I went into this room filled with kids that I did not know. I did not know how this was going to turn out. I was terrified of the experience. But what happened was nothing short of magic. I fell in love with the whole program. I made a best friend who became my best friend for many, 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 many years. I fell in love with the speakers, with the experience. We did a community service project. It was just magical. And when the convention ended, I told my dad, you have to bring me back next year. And that became a tradition where year after year, my father would take me to the National Speakers Association, and he would attend the adult program. I would attend the youth program. But those 5 days was our time together. It was just so special. Now, even though we were independent and doing our own thing, that convention became a real bond for us. Like I said before, my parents were divorced and my father was traveling 80% of the time, so I didn't get to spend a lot of time with him. But I knew that every year for 5 days, it was just him and me. This was our time. And we just developed this love for the experience, for sharing the speakers, sharing the convention, going to dinner together. We were so bonded by this that I longed for it all year long. I looked forward to it and I savored every minute of my time there. Now, eventually I did become an adult, and once I was in law school and getting ready to get married and I started having kids, I wasn't going to convention anymore. I had aged out of the youth program and I wasn't actively speaking, so it wasn't a thing for me to do. But in 2014, my father had become very ill with cancer. He was in the middle of chemotherapy, and I was with him at one of our doctor's appointments, and we were going over the schedule of his chemo. He opens his calendar and he tells the doctor, "Oh, doctor, on these dates, I can't do chemo because I'm traveling." And the doctor says, "Joaquin, you're not traveling. Like, you can't travel while you're doing this chemo. This is a very intense chemo, very aggressive. You can't be traveling." And he said, "Doc, you don't understand. This is the National Speakers Association. I don't miss the National Speakers Association. So I'm traveling. We need to work around it." Now, my dad was very eclectic and a man of conviction, and also very obedient with his doctors and his protocols. For him to say this to the doctor knew he meant business and that this man was not going to miss his convention. So they worked around him and opened up the center on a Saturday so that they could give him his chemotherapy, and then he was going to take a flight, go to San Diego where the convention was, be there for a couple of days, and then take a red eye back to Miami so that he can get his next chemo treatment without interrupting the treatments. and still be able to do what he wanted to do. That was my dad. And of course, in that year, I told my husband, I can't let him go by himself. First of all, he's sick. What if something happens to him? What if he has some side effect from the chemo? And also just intuitively, I knew that I had to go with him. And I'm so glad that I did, because 2014, San Diego was the last time that my father and I ever attended NSA together. It was his last year on this earth. And we had the most magical experience. I remember us standing there watching the opening session, holding hands and walking down the halls, and him looking at me and saying, "This is our tribe. These are our people. I love being here." And me thinking just how happy I was that I was enjoying that experience with him. In 2015, my father had passed away just a month before convention, and I questioned whether I should go back or if I should stay home and not be exposed to it because maybe it'd be too painful. But I thought about it and how important it was for him. In 26 years, he never missed a convention. And I thought this was so important to him. And the people in the convention were so important to him. I owe it to them, and I owe it to him, and I owe it to myself to go back. So I went back. And I remember when the doors opened into the hotel lobby and I got that fresh gust of AC, and I saw some of the NSA members with their badges walking around. I felt like I was walking into his living room. It was like, I'm home and I'm here to visit. And ever since then, I decided I would go to NSA every year, no matter what. So in 2018, I had the privilege of bringing my first son to NSA because the convention starts when the youth program starts when you're 10 years old. And every 2 years after that, I was able to welcome another one of my children until all three of them were able to attend the NSA youth program. And they had the same magical experience that I had. And here we were, living my father's legacy, following this tradition, and passing on the sparks of bliss from one down to the other. It was incredibly meaningful for our family, continues to be incredibly meaningful for our family. And who knows how long we'll be able to enjoy that and continue that tradition. You see, that's the thing about traditions and rituals. They are this beautiful way of creating a cumulative effect of joy, of memories, of stability. They connect us to the past. They help us look forward to the future. They create a sacred space and they foster connection. And they are a way of creating an intentional life. And traditions and rituals are actually used often interchangeably, but they do have their differences. A ritual is something that's specific and sometimes symbolic. It's usually actions that are performed in a particular sequence, right? There's beautiful meaning to them and they're very purposeful. Whereas a tradition is more of a practice or a belief or something that is passed down from generation to generation or holiday to holiday, or it's not necessarily a ritual. It's just more of an event that you pass down, or something that bonds you culturally or socially or connects you to your heritage, etc. Now, NSA has both. It is we have the tradition of going every year. That's the tradition, and the tradition that these children go from the year that they're from when they turn 10 to they're 17, then they become youth leaders, so on and so forth. But then within that tradition, we have a set of rituals that I've been able to enjoy not only as an attendee when I was a youth, but then I got to see it as the co-chair because I eventually became the co-chair of NSA. So I got to see these traditions that have been going on now for 40 years and these rituals that have been being performed for 40 years go on from year to year to year because these kids, these youth leaders preserve them. They remember them, they preserve them, they cherish them. And that action, those actions really create such fond memories, and they create this container that allows for sparks of bliss. Now, not all traditions and rituals create a container for sparks of bliss, but when you find one, you must follow it. You must continue it because it is very special. Now, speaking of special traditions, I want to share another tradition that I have implemented in my life as a mom, and I do every August, that has become very meaningful in our family, and that is the tradition of School Year's Eve. You see, I remember being a kid and never really feeling like New Year's Eve was the beginning of a new year, because when I went on break and I came back from break, I was going into the same school year. And I don't know about you, but when I was a kid, my year really felt like it started and it ended with what grade I was going into, right? So if I was in the sixth grade and I was starting the sixth grade, that was the new year. And even though there was a New Year's Eve in the middle of that, I was still going back to sixth grade. So it was just a continuation of my year. And it really didn't end until I went into the summer months and transitioned into seventh grade. Knowing this, I thought my children should have their own New Year's Eve, and I coined it School Year's Eve. I started this tradition in 2019. I just had this idea of like the night before school, I set up a really nice dinner. I brought out our fine china. I bought grapes because in Cuban tradition on New Year's Eve, you eat 12 grapes at midnight for good luck for the year. So I would buy grapes for all of the kids and I would put 12 in a little cup. I'd put like books on the table. I'd do all this stuff. And then our five fingers, our family of five, would sit around the table. We'd have this really nice dinner, and then we would create our School Year's Eve resolutions. And I would invite my kids to talk about what they want, what intentions they wanted to set for the next school year, what they wanted that year to look like, what they were hoping to get out of the school year, what they were going to focus on. You know, I would make it very specific to them. And then they would write all their intentions on a little piece of paper. And I would put all of the papers in a little Ziploc bag. And I would label the Ziploc bag the year, 2019 to 2020. And then the following year on School Year's Eve, I would have that paper and we would look back on what our intentions were at the beginning of the year. And we would see, what did we honor? What did we forget? What do we want to continue? What did we work on? What worked? What didn't work? What do we want to do differently? Like all that kind of stuff. And it became this great tradition. And since my kids were little, we wouldn't, and it was a school night. It was like the night before school. I didn't want to keep them up too late. So at around 9:00, I would do the countdown as if it was midnight. And we'd count down, 10, 9, 8, 7, blah, 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 blah. Happy New Year. And I would buy little hats and the whole thing. And they'd eat their grapes at 9 p.m. and then they'd get into their beds. We'd tuck them in with all of their uniform and school supplies and everything ready to go. And the next day, they would start a brand new, fresh year. And I did that in 2019, and it was such a hit that we never stopped doing it. Every year since then, we've had School Year's Eve. And this week, I was having dinner with my family, and we were talking, and my son is entering the 10th grade in a new school, and they have this thing called Warrior Week that they go to. So it's like this away camp that they participate in. And he was like, Mom, what are we going to do about School Year's Eve? What day are we going to do it? Are we going to have 2 different School Year's Eves, like one for Justin and Ryan and one for me? Like it was, we're having this conversation because it was such an important part of our family dynamic, right? It's such a great tradition that we have. that it's become embedded in our family. And even though my son's getting older, and I don't know if it's still as important to him or if he just does it because it's important to me, I'm not sure. But the fact that we still share that and we cherish it and we honor it is very, very special to all of us. So one of the things I want to encourage you to do is to start paying attention to the traditions and the rituals that are sacred in your family, in your home, in your relationships. They don't have to be NSA or School Year's Eve. They could be traditions of your own. Maybe it's a Thanksgiving tradition, or it's a ritual that you guys have on a weekly basis, or something that you do. Whatever it is, they are things that have become sacred, and they are things that you have such fond memories of. And bliss is one of those things that we experience it 3 different times. We experience it when we think of something, right? When we dream something and we dream of achieving this thing, we experience the spark. Then we experience it when we actually achieve the thing. And sometimes the spark is a surprise, and sometimes it's like the culmination of an accomplishment, right? So when you experienced it, and in the present moment, we now have experienced it. And then we experience it when we remember that moment. So when you have these traditions, it's an interesting thing because first you received the spark probably when you've by a surprise, right? Like you created this thing, and then all of a sudden it was like, oh, there's a spark. It's bliss. And then you start to create repetition of it. And then when you remember it in cumulative form, it sparks bliss in your life because it starts to become beads that you are accumulating in this necklace of life that you have. And it's very special. So that's my topic for today. Traditions and rituals. Creating this grounding, sacred force that bonds you and your family or your friends, that is something for you to look forward to long for, to love doing, and to remember. And those are the things that get us on our path. Those are the little moments that even though we may have a hard year, even though we may be struggling, even though we may have millions of crises and tragedies and chaotic moments and rushed mornings and traffic and, all the things that complicate life. Every once in a while, we have these traditions and these rituals that bring us back to center, that remind us that life is beautiful and it is sacred and it is meant to be cherished. And if you have that, you are living your life to pay attention and listen for the sparks of bliss. I hope this helps, and let me know if you are going to have a School Year's Eve with your kids. If you happen to be a parent and have kids in school, let me know if you're going to have your own School Year's Eve, or what traditions and rituals really hold space in your heart and in your family. I would love to know more. Have a sacred Sunday, everybody, and see you next week.
That's it for today's episode. Thanks so much for being here. I am deeply, deeply grateful for this time to connect. Now, if you are feeling called to dig deeper and really work on elevating your mindset, your wellness, and your relationships, and you're looking for a life coach to work with you one-on-one and really help you just retrain your brain, define success on your own terms, and just live healthier, happier, and more meaningful life, well, I invite you to schedule a consult with me. Let's have a conversation and see if working together is in our future. You can find the link to calendar of consult right there in my show notes, but you can also connect with me on my website, carolinedeposada.com, or send me a DM on Instagram at Caroline de Posada. I'm so excited to connect with you a little further. Now, as far as this podcast goes, I would so appreciate if you could leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Those reviews help us so much. And like my friend always says, the project is big and you're a part of it. So thank you for helping me spread good in this world.